Right. Something completely different, and partly based on, well, finds rather than the actual pots. This is something that came about really because I left paid employment in 2018. And so really, I have the advantage that I can do what I please, and have spent the last few years reading pot reports, reading grey literature, reading publications, and so on and so on. And what really exercises me, I suppose, is the idea of transition. It's a very tricky thing to get to grips with and to know how to approach. And it is the late Iron Age, early Roman transition, which I think, this is just an approach that I've sort of developed and to see what comes out of it. It's not a problem. It's the point of a transition is that it is a process of change, and it's not something to be somehow got round or ignored or whatever. We have to tackle this. So how do we tackle this? What's interesting to me, in a sense, is the way that the pottery in this era develops levels of significance and meaning and so forth that it doesn't have in the previous era. With the Middle Iron Age, you've got really that, because a lot of locally, is this working? No, it's not. That's better. You've got a lot of locally produced Middle Iron Age pots that just use their local fabrics and so forth. The area that I'm talking about is really southeastern Britain. And in this period, which is really 1st century BC to 1st century AD, you can gradually see the appearance of pots which are still handmade, but they're requiring interest. For the first time, they have a sort of aesthetic sense to them, which they haven't had for quite a long time. And gradually you get the introduction of, you get the grog tempering, which is such a characteristic of southeastern Britain in the late Iron Age, and the appearance of new technology, because you're starting to get the fast potter's wheel. This is much more complicated than just a change from one to the other, because here's an enormous pot from, it's a burial pot from Letchworth, and there's no way that this could have been made on the wheel because it's far too big, it would have collapsed. So what you might have is, say, a wheel-made foot, and then these cordons here are applied to disguise the end of a day's construction by hand, and it's left to dry out until the next day, and then you do another lift and so forth. And how they fired them, goodness knows. But anyway, in the kilns of the time, so clearly they're acquiring status. So let's see what else we've got. Yes, as I said, I've read through hundreds of these, hundreds for across several counties. And it is possible to, I've looked at and read as many reports as I can, which seem to provide specific information about the kind of pottery, the range, and so forth, and date range, etc., and putting all that together to reach a broader view. And just to clear the decks a little, this is Martin Millett's 1990 map of pre-Flavian forts that were known and surmised in 1990. And I'm just going to talk about Claudian forts in the southeast, essentially. Just ignore all the ones, all of this lot up here. But it's this area which I had a look at, and just the ones for which there might be some evidence of an actual Claudian date. And this actually is the result. There is a vast empty blank area here. The only forts for which we have evidence of a Claudian date are Richborough, Camulodunum, Longthorpe and Alchester, which wasn't known about in 1990 anyway. It was surmised. Silchester's got a good deal of what appears to be Roman military equipment, but there's no fort as far as they can tell. All this other stuff, frankly, I think, it's time there was a thorough review of the evidence for these forts, but that's not my business. But the thing is, why have we got this enormous empty triangle? And I think the other thing which is relevant here is the territory of Verlamion, which is there's a conventional name for pre-Roman Verulamium. And what you've got here is, and I hope you can see some of the detail, this is Verlamion. You've got essentially a river valley with a plateau on each side and Wheeler's Ditch coming down here like this. The hatched area is the area where people actually lived. This is not an urban place. It's a very odd place, but they lived in a serious string of farmstead enclosures along the plateau, and it's probably much bigger than this area here. There's a little bit more up on this side, which was cleared away in the early first century AD. And Wheeler's Ditch is marking the edge of the plateau. And the valley itself has got nothing in it, very difficult to excavate, but it's got burials, which do not appear up on the top here, apart from a few in an entrance, well, a gate through the Wheeler Ditch. But in the bottom of the valley, it seems to be entirely burials, ritual pits, and special deposits of coin pellet mold. And here on the up here, you've got the reconstruction in Rosalind Niblett's publication of the Folly Lane burial. You've got a reconstruction painting of pre-cremation rites in the funerary shaft. And this is the gentleman buried up here in a big enclosure. Now, the enclosure itself predates that burial. It's very difficult to date, but it was possibly 20s, 30s AD. And to Ros, it looked very strongly like a Gaulish sanctuary site. The Folly Lane burial dates to about AD 55. So he's a client king, given a late Iron Age chieftain burial, with an extraordinary mix of finds which are partly insular, partly Gaulish, and partly Mediterranean. But there's a view that, of course, these client kings were imposed by Claudius in 43. I don't agree with that at all, because at Verulamium, you can show that there were very strong links with Gaul, which went back 3 generations. And this is, these links with Gaul seem to be most obviously demonstrated at the King Harry Lane Cemetery, which is this one just here. Here's the Folly Lane up here on the opposite hill with a trackway which ran down. And this is just the list of what was in that cemetery. They never found the limits of it. Work by Sophie Adams at the British Museum, radiocarbon dating the graves which had brooches in them, has shown that the cemetery itself goes back to perhaps it's post-Caesarean anyway. It's earlier than had been thought. And you've got 455 plus cremations and pots from all over Gaul, as well as all these other things. You've got a mix here of these 3 elements, insular, Gaulish, Mediterranean. And this is from the 1st century BC, right up to AD 55. So you have not got a client king imposed in AD 43 upon an ungrateful local population. It's not like that at all. Also to emphasize that AD 43 is not the year of the Roman conquest. It's the year of the Claudian invasion, which is a different matter entirely. And even in the southeast, we could say that. So to my mind, what's going on is, because this is not a market economy, you've got imports coming in, the sort of imports that we can see at Folly Lane, and even richer goods elsewhere and so forth. It's a question of patrons and clients, that these high status things are distributed at major feasting events, which certainly took place at Braffing and places like that. And they were gifts from patrons to clients. You couldn't go out and buy Terra Nigra plates if you wanted one. You had to be given this sort of thing at this kind of event, which led on to a phenomenon which in effect turned into insular versions of, they're not copies of imports, they are in fact local versions. And these ceramics do suggest invention in a very interesting way. Verlamion has very distinctive ceramics, even in the grog tempering. It's a lot, it's the sort of thing which you recognize when you see it. So what have I got on this slide? I can't see it from here. What I've been looking at is the spread of Verlamion's ceramics, because I thought it might tell me some clue as to the extent of Verlamion's territory up to AD 55. The point being, of course, that it's only in AD 55 or thereabouts that Verlamion's territory becomes part of the Roman Empire, not before. It's not legally part of the province of Britannia. And so this is I thought was worth pursuing. And the trouble with being no longer at work is that I haven't got access anymore to the wonderful GIS system which I used to be able to play with. So what this is really is sort of little bits of paper stuck onto bigger bits, but the base map here is taken from Oxford Archaeologist's monograph on the Broughton site at Milton Keynes, because it's a very useful base map showing the area that I'm concerned with, because here's Verlamion at the bottom there, and the course of what became Watling Street and so forth. And this map, in fact, simply shows 1st century BC cremations, the first cremations that appear in these areas for a long time, and they're very distinctive. And it's across these 3 counties, and it shows the area that I've been having a look at. Interestingly, you can see how evenly distributed they are. So what I did was have a look at all the reports that I could find with these ceramics and see whether it told me anything about the spread and Verlamion's influence. And sure enough, the second half of the 1st century BC, and I might say here also that it's my dating, my take on the date of these ceramics, and not necessarily what was in the publication or the grey literature. And in fact, you can see quite an interesting sequence, because here you've got the blue dots, they cover a much wider spread. The yellow dots are non-funerary. Some of it is obviously quite early, but it's in a smaller area, and it doesn't spread very far from Verlamion itself. The first third of the 1st century AD, by this time, the non-funerary grog has spread somewhat. It's spreading out along what came to be Aikman Street, but not very far. It does go to Milton Keynes, and there's 1 or 2 sites turning up there. You might think that this distribution is skewed by the distribution of excavations, but in fact that's not the case, because in the Milton Keynes area, there's a lot of stuff, but it's all up here, and it doesn't spread down this area, and where there has been at least as much excavation. And then we get on to the second quarter, and a little bit more of the 1st century AD. There's a lot of cremations. They're spreading out a bit further. They've gone as far north as Bedford. And that's the same period for the non-funerary pottery. Huge concentration of sites in the Milton Keynes area. And it's spreading northeast as far as Bedford as well, and it's spread out as far as Aylesbury. And incognitus about AD 55. The point being that there are just the very first signs of a Roman layout at Verulamium in the late 50s. Of course, almost immediately burnt down, and it's only after that that the Roman town begins to appear. AD 45 to 70 plus, obviously Roman vessels are starting to appear in these graves, but it's roughly the same distribution. And then finally, the non-funerary ones, it's still going, it's still spreading. The spreading out, interestingly, into a ring at Milton Keynes, into a ring around the area of these slightly earlier sites, and there's a lot of it in the Bedford area. And as I put down there at the bottom, a slow post-Boudiccan recovery at Ver, and then by AD 70 it has become a Roman town, but not before. So patrons and clients, we don't know how high up or how many layers of this there are. I've only been looking at the Verulamium area, and I have no idea yet how it relates to, say, patronage at a higher level, whether it's further east in the sort of Camulodunum area, or whether it's with Gaul, or whether it's directly with the Mediterranean. It's not tip-top what goes on in Ver, but Milton Keynes does seem to be a client territory of Verulamium, of Verulamion anyway, and it goes to as far as the river Great Ouse, and it doesn't really go much further than that. So I think we can say that Ver's territory goes that far. It goes eastwards to an extent through Hertfordshire, doesn't go very far west in Buckinghamshire, beyond Aylesbury, and it's something that that I can continue to work on, to have a look at this. But incidentally, the Gallo-Belgic influx of imports, here's the map off the internet, the Gallo-Belgic pottery database. And you would think, looking at that, that's interesting, here is the spread of it. But a lot of it is very late, and it badly needs reconsidering to work out how far these imports actually spread from the Gallo-Belgic import horizon in the 1st century BC, because in Buckinghamshire and Bedfordshire, you don't get any at all until the mid-1st century AD. And the reason why it's not getting this material is interesting. So it must say something about how you got hold of this material, because until a commercial economy comes in with the idea of pots being commercial products for sale, it's not going to work like that. So I've said it here, all the above is really, you're tracing a process across time and space. And this is how to tackle a transition, because this would be the element that you can do with other things, other subjects, other areas, to follow what's going on through a transition. And I'm just going to have a quick word about kiln technology, because of course this is a big facet as well in the development of these ceramics. One more of these maps. What I've shown at the bottom right there is some of these interesting ceramics that were developed at Ver. But these ones were made at Milton Keynes at in the Caldecott kiln and that area, and they're quite distinctively local made versions of Gallo-Belgic imports, butt beakers, girth beakers, and in this area these new products are well, these girth beaker things, like the bottom right one, very large, very orange, showing strong control of the firing process. This is quite deliberate. These versions of Gallo-Belgic imports have this deliberate orange surface. And so I've marked on here in red kilns that we know of. All the dots on this map are kilns of pre-Flavian date, where we've got some reasonable idea of what was actually produced in them. The yellow dots you can see coming in from coming in this way and gradually ending up in the Nene Valley up here. The blue ones are shell, and lots of kilns known up here. The red kilns down here are briquette wood, just south of St Albans, and they were making local versions of Gallo-Belgic imports, and they had orange surfaces, and the date is pre-50 because they were all, it was over by AD 50. In other words, this is pre the death of the client king. You want me to wind up? Yes, I think this is about the end of it. So there's more could be done to see what's going on here, but it's the yellow ones, the sand on here, those are later at Verulamium. So that's more or less it. It's a very interesting period to see all this experimentation going on. And it's an example of the sort of thing that can be done, I hope, to move things on, to define other things, other processes that can be seen across this time and space, so that we have a more accurate idea of what was actually going on during this transition, and move on from the idea that AD 43 is the Roman conquest. Thank you.